I don't have much time left. My hands are still listening, but judging by the way the stains are spreading, I have to write fast. If you're reading this, it means you came here, to my apartment, and found this notebook. Perhaps you were fleeing from another city. Perhaps you were chased by a creature, and you ran into the first apartment I could find. My apartment, the door to which I had thoughtfully left open. You can take whatever you want. Food, if it doesn't go bad. Clothes, dishes, I don't mind. I won't be needing it anytime soon. There is one thing I ask of you. If you see me or Alla not lying where we are supposed to be, on the floor, please stop us. Alla is unlikely to get up, but I might. The first time I saw him was on Tuesday. I was walking to work at the factory in the morning, and he was moving toward me. Moving is a better definition, because moving is hard to apply to his wobbly, jerky, mechanical gait. He wasn't exactly a homeless man, but rather a hobo, of which there are many in all major cities. Hitchhiker beggars with backpacks and caps for change, in which to dump money for the road to Altai. They play guitars in the crossings, sometimes sleep on benches, and they are from 20 to 35 years old. They have girls with them, usually young and tanned, with clean faces and a thirst for adventure. I give him about 20 by his clothes, a big hooded sweatshirt pulled over his head, white pants, the visor of a cap sticking out from under the hood. He moves slowly and weakly, the huge backpack seeming to overbalance him, sometimes resting as a weight on his back, sometimes pulling his body back. When there were 4 meters between us, he raised his head and stared at me with a hazy look. That's when I knew the guy was dead. The first thing was the cloudy, glassy, frosted eyes. If you've had a dying cat, you know those dried eyes that no longer wet dead tear glands. The second was that he looked much older. His skin was a distinct yellow color. If you've been to a meat market and seen a pig's head, you know that color. The third was the purple lips. They were pointlessly open, the lower one sagging, revealing an uneven row of teeth. As we neared each other, I was hit with a wave of stench that came from the guy, a mixture of old sweat, alcohol, urine, and rotten meat smells. If you've forgotten the cutlets and the heat, well, you get the idea. I automatically shuddered away from him and quickened my pace. I turned around, everyone was avoiding him. A grimace of disgust flashed on their faces. So I wasn't the only one who saw him, and that was important. I'd forgotten all about the guy until this evening. What was there to think about? I thought of him as a junkie, high on drugs, jaundiced, and rightly shaken off. God forbid he should catch something. And I forgot for the rest of the day. Did I mention that I work as an engineer? I think it's worth noting. The hand works, and I tell everything quickly. I realized this when I started writing. In general, I'm not a writer to convey on paper the whole gamut of feelings and thoughts, but I'm also not a dumb alcoholic, so you understand. It is important to tell everything as it is and not to start reasoning. So, I'm a mechanical engineer. I work at a factory that produces agricultural machinery, tractors, combines. I make good money, and I love my job. I am lucky. I guess I do not often manage to work in my field of study for 12 years and to be satisfied. By the way, my name is Nikolai. You will find my passport details and the papers in the bottom drawer of the desk, if anyone needs them. I have no wife and no children either. There was Jenya, but she left 2 years ago. Since then, my only close person is my sister Alla. Alachka, forgive me, baby. I nursed you in my arms 22 years ago, changed your nappies and fed you. When your mother had her periods, I almost became your mother. Now you're lying here, and I'm looking at your leg, and I think it's moving. I can't kill you a second time. You're gonna have to do it faster. Okay, the first time I saw the thing was Tuesday morning, and I forgot about it until tonight. When I got off work, it was already dark. It gets dark early in the fall. I live near the factory and always walk. My path led through an alley in the park, which was almost deserted at this hour. I walked leisurely, breathing the humid air. few lanterns illuminated the small patches of the alley, picking out some of the benches from the darkness. They were all empty except one. There was a woman sitting there. I could tell by her long hair and shiny jacket. She was sitting, bent over, her hair covering her face. I slowed my pace and, wrinkling my head, walked toward her. Her posture indicated that she was not well. "We need to help the man. Maybe call the doctors." I stopped and turned to her. "Young lady, are you sick? Should I call an ambulance?" She looked up. The moment replayed in my head, like an excerpt from a movie. A dark park alley, an illuminated circle of light, two people in this circle, as on a stage, and she slowly raises her head. Even now, as a 35-year-old man, I remember that moment with a shudder. For the second time that day, the wax mask of a dead man was staring at me. Convex, muddy, swamp-colored eyes, skin already stained lilac in places, my face slightly swollen, my lips bluish. For a few infinitely long seconds, she parted those awful lips. Wah! Her voice came from somewhere deep in her chest, hoarse and gurgling, as if she were speaking for the first time after a very long silence. I turned sharply and walked away from her. My back felt as cold and hard as wood, and my knees felt uncomfortable. I walked slowly, gradually speeding up my pace. Then I heard a movement behind me, and the clatter of my heels. Suddenly I turned around. She was standing near the bench with her head down. After a moment's hesitation, I went further, already faster. The heels rattled again, faster by the second. I ran and heard her running after me. The exit from the park was not at the end of the alley. We had to go past the now inoperable rides, turning to the right. I ran toward these rides, panting. The terribly loud thumping behind me was still as if a couple of meters away. When the distance between us diminished, I swerved to the left and ducked into the shadows of the Ferris wheel. The footsteps behind me faded. I turned around. There was no sign of her. The nearest streetlight was 7 meters away, outlining the area quite brightly, but hiding me in the dense shadows. Crouching down, I breathed frantically. I should have given up smoking and running in the morning 10 years ago. It was too late now anyway. I stood with my hands on my knees, spitting on the ground. I didn't know where the dead woman had gone. I just didn't think about it at the time. At last I caught my breath and straightened up. Fear began to set in again, freezing my knees. I was sure I was going to turn around and see her behind me, like a corny horror movie. I had nothing at hand as a weapon except a bunch of keys. I clenched it in my fist and turned around sharply. There was no one behind me, of course. I turned and fumbled for the exit from the park. The gate was open, and beyond it was the road, with the occasional car passing by. Almost relieved, I moved quickly toward the exit. 5 feet from the gate I stopped abruptly and froze like a stone. She was standing behind a tree to the left of the exit, her patent leather jacket gleaming in the light of the lantern that was burning here. For 10 seconds we stood staring at each other. Or rather, I was looking at her because I couldn't follow her gaze. In those seconds I got a good look at her, judging by her clothes. She was neither homeless nor a drug addict. A good jacket, high leather boots, short denim skirt. Her hair was black. By the looks of it, she was in her early 20s or so. She stood without moving, with her head down. I thought she was looking at me sideways, but I wasn't sure for sure. We stood like that, unmoving, waiting for each other's first act. I'm sure she could have stood like that until morning, but I couldn't. As I regrouped, I launched myself sharply toward the open gate, marking to the right, a little farther away from her. She didn't move until we were level with each other. Then she jerked and grabbed my jacket in a flash. I twisted and kicked her in the stomach. She flew away, flailing her arms, and fell somewhere in the bushes. I didn't wait for her to get up. and rushed away. I ran all the way home, unable to bring myself to stop. Already in the entryway, running up the stairs to my second floor, I felt a burning sensation in my hand. When I slowed down, I looked at my hand and felt cold. There was a pretty deep scratch near my thumb. I started frantically remembering and realized that she had scratched me when I had punched her in the stomach. I went home feeling sentenced to execution. For myself, I had already figured out what this girl was and what she wanted from me. It wasn't a bite, of course, but it was the cadaveric poison that soaked into her like a sponge. The first thing I did was to wash my hands with soap and water, then apply hydrogen peroxide to the wound and apply a generous amount of green, pouring it right in. The chemical burn didn't scare me, it scared me in a different way. I took a hot shower and threw all my clothes, along with my jacket, into the washing machine, just in case. I poured myself some tea and began to analyze the situation. As you can imagine, it is very hard to really understand and accept that you are faced with something supernatural. Again, the thought of the living dead makes me ashamed of myself, as if you had been caught doing something indecent. Well, unless you're 15 years old, of course. I'm 35 now. So I started thinking, if the morning guy really could have been a jaundiced junkie, how could I explain the girl's situation? Even if you write off her dead face as a play of light and shadow in a dark park, how do you understand the behavior? Why did she run after me? Why was she waiting at the gate? A fragile 20-year-old girl against a big grown man? Not a single normal thought crossed my mind. Now I think back to myself 5 days ago, and I'm not surprised at my naivety. Yes, I couldn't believe it. Who could? Who would recognize a werewolf and a giant dog, or an alien and a naked freak? To the last, they will be a giant dog and a freak. Nothing more. That's how our brain works. There are thousands of processes going on in the gray matter in a second that are designed to hold our world together and keep it from falling to pieces. At the right moment, not to notice something, to give an association, to replace one memory with another. The slightest glitch and you're crazy. I'm distracted by something. It's getting harder to write. My hands are wooden. The color, it's disgusting to look at. I've got to get this over with, and you don't need my reasoning. Anyway, you understood how I first met them 5 days ago. It got a lot worse from there. On Wednesday I saw 5 of them. One, in a strict suit, was sitting on a bench with a newspaper. People walked by, quickening their pace, as if they didn't notice his bald, moldy face. I, however, walked the same way myself. Then there was the girl at the cigarette stand, the little boy with the backpack, the fat woman on the bus, and the grandmother on the bench outside my front door. I noticed that they looked worse than yesterday, more signs of decomposition, more lethargic movements. I don't know the cause of what happened, and I can't know, but I think it's some kind of virus that turns the living into the dead, bypassing the moment of death itself. All the zombies I've met are obviously not out of their graves. Maybe they don't realize they're dead themselves. I still went to work on Thursday, but after lunch I called in sick and went home. It was about Luba the barmaid's lip, which fell into the soup of the man standing in front of me. I abruptly got out of line and went to the exit. Out of the corner of my eye I noticed people chewing as if nothing had happened. They were everywhere now. Supermarket clerks, mothers with strollers, workers on the road. There were about 10% of them in relation to normal people, but people didn't react to the creatures in any way. How should they have reacted? They behave calmly, they don't attack. Someone has to make the first move, but it won't be us. How do you imagine that? Jump out into the street with a shotgun and start killing them? And if that doesn't stop them, what if the virus spreads faster? Better to wait and see if the government takes action. Maybe it already has. They just don't tell us anything to avoid panic. I didn't leave the house on Friday. It was unbearable to see them, to smell their stench, and to pretend that nothing happened. I called work said I was sick, but when I heard the gurgling voice of Marina, the employee, I couldn't stand it and hung up. The whole day I sat in a kind of stupor, flicking channels in search of news, but heard nothing worthwhile. Already in the evening I felt as if I had been given an electric shock. Alla. Oh my God, Alla. I rushed to call her, but she didn't pick up. Of course, it's Friday night. Doesn't she notice anything? What if something happens to her? I called her probably 50 times, but she didn't call back until midnight. Kolia, what happened? I was at the club. I almost had a heart attack when I saw the missed calls. I sighed with relief. Her voice was still ringing and high. Cautiously asked if she noticed anything strange. Alla answered something like, no. I asked her to come to my house tomorrow and bring some medicine, saying I was sick. I just had to meet her, make sure everything was okay, tell her about the danger, which for some reason she didn't see. Come on, as if we could see anything beyond our noses until we faced each other head on. Today she came in. I opened her door, and my heart sank in my heels. She was standing on the doorstep, my own girl, with a short, bright haircut and ripped jeans, and she was dead. The worst part was that it was as if she didn't realize it herself. Alla put one arm around me, giving me a wave of stench, and pushed past me, waving a bag of something sweet. I came to my senses for a few moments, listening to her chirp from the room. I noticed that her voice was almost the same, but there was a hoarseness in the high notes. I walked into the room, and I don't remember much of what happened next. I remember her cloudy eyes, which had gone from blue to almost white, her half-rotten ear from which, at one point, an earring had fallen out, leaving a tear in its wake. I remember shouting something to her, and she shouted back, about how I was hallucinating, about my mom being sick, about doctors. Maybe I should have listened to her, returned to the world of illusion, closed my eyes to everything, if I hadn't seen her cracked blue lips, her piercing surrounded by mold, her cloudy eyes, her torn ear, and her pointy, alien nose right in front of me. I remember going out into the kitchen. She rushed after me, and I grabbed the hammer and, it's time. The scratch that creature had given me in the park had already spread an infection. I looked in the mirror and saw how my complexion was changing. My fingers were already dry and yellow, and it was getting harder to write. I found the pills my mother used to take before she threw herself out the window. They'd been expired for 5 years, but it doesn't matter. It's even better this way. Besides, there are plenty of them. The door is open, and I write in the kitchen so I can see Alla. I think she's moving, but I'm not sure. Her head has turned into a mess. It is unlikely she will get up now. A zombie is alive as long as it has a brain, right? One thing I ask, if you come here, and I come out to meet you, the hammer is on the table. Do it. Stop me. I'm not the hero who's going to save the world from zombies. I'm just one of the thousands of victims who wander in droves in search of the proteins that are in the brains of the living. It's time. I take my pills. Drinking. Nothing happens yet, but I can feel my legs getting cold. A little blurred in front of my eyes. It is very difficult to write. My hands do not obey. I happened to see a mirror. It was strange. The pills must have worked. I began to hallucinate. In the mirror I am normal, only pale. And Alina's leg is normal. I know it's the pills. The gray matter is dying off.